So let me just quickly introduce myself as we kick things off. My name is Michael Goldberg, and I'm the Executive Director of the Veale Institute for Entrepreneurship at Case Western Reserve, and we're located usually at ThinkBox, so today in my house, as we all are. I'm also a professor at Weatherhead teaching entrepreneurship in the business school, and we're thrilled, Aaron, that you're able to join us today as part of our speaker series. The format for our speaker series like today is that we have student moderators, and we're really lucky to have Maren Exler joining us. Maren is a senior on her way to graduation. I know there's a few more things between now and graduating, and she actually is our past president of the undergraduate student government, and also just won a huge award on campus for being all things good at the university. So congrats, Maren.
Thank you.
And, as people join and as you're participating on Facebook, please just put your questions in the comment, or if you're here, we're a small enough group that Maren can just call on you directly if you want to ask a question, or you can just let her know in the chat that you have a question. So I'm going to turn it over to Maren, who's going to run the show. So Maren and Aaron, thanks for both of you for doing this.
Yeah, so thank you so much for having us, Dr. Goldberg. Like you mentioned, my name is Maren. I'm a fourth-year student studying political science and Spanish, so I'm not actually in the Weatherhead School and haven't really dabbled in entrepreneurship. I did win the 6th grade invention convention for my invention taco tape, but that is all that I'm familiar with in terms of being an entrepreneur. But I think it's really, really interesting, especially in this time, to talk about leadership, what it means to be a global leader, how we are all interconnected, and how marketing and brands and different industries can connect and both bring us together and help us realize that even in this time we can be creating and connecting. So I'm really excited to have Aaron join us to talk about his experience. Aaron, if you want to introduce yourself a little bit, give us a little bit of your background, and then I have some questions to get us started, and we'll also take questions from everyone here as well.
Thanks for having me again, guys. It's been great, and I graduated, I think, from the executive MBA program back in 2008, and trying to get back to Cleveland as much as I can. I'm based in New York City. I live in New Jersey, but our offices are in New York. And, I did make great friends through my journey with Weatherhead. So as much as I can, I try to make it back there and hang out with my buddies and so on and so forth. And so once again, thanks for having me. I think I love this kind of format just because I think that, it's a small group and we can be somewhat intimate in terms of, the topics we cover and also just the questions that you guys might have. So I don't have, that scripted of an agenda in terms of things I want to talk about, but I heard I think it was Leslie who asked some good questions already in terms of kind of some topics that she might want to touch. So please, Michael or Maren, if you guys are facilitating, feel free just to jump in and ask questions. So a little about myself in terms of background. I come from the merchant acquisition and finance background. Spent about over a decade with General Electric, in a number of different roles, primarily in finance, but later on in operations, Six Sigma, Lean. Was fortunate enough to really seeing a variety of different businesses and across different industries. Lived in about 12 countries, with GE and traveled quite a bit. And then ultimately before leaving GE, I was leading as a CFO for one of their oil and gas businesses. So pretty different than fashion. And the reason I think coming back to fashion, I should say, it's mainly because of my family background. My family has been doing handbag manufacturing, specifically high-end handbag manufacturing for, almost 3 decades. We were one of the first few factories and manufacturers that took some of the Italian luxury brands into China back in the 80s when they were starting to explore, kind of their global footprint beyond Italy. So have been really much, growing up kind of in the biz, if you may. I have always been somewhat fascinated by fashion and retail specifically. And, I think, I was at the point in my career where, I love the company. GE is a great leadership growing machine. So I was able to learn a lot of the skill sets that I currently have, I think, to lead a company. But, I was looking for kind of the next chapter in my life in terms of what to do. And I chose retail just because it's such an old industry to a certain extent, that I think, I feel back then, 2013, 2014, that there was a lot of room for disruption. And I kind of hate the word disruption to a certain extent, just because I feel like it's pretty overused, the term, but I really felt that there was a lot of things that could be done differently, in luxury fashion or contemporary fashion or just retail in general. So in 2014, me and my co-founder, we founded CARAA. And, there's a couple things about the brand that we kind of, build a brand based on in terms of the cadences. I think the key thing is, so the brand is a women's handbag brand, if you kind of boil it down to it. But I think the key thing we're trying to do in terms of disrupting the category is, instead of leading through marketing and storytelling, we wanted to actually lead through innovative products and innovative designs. So let me explain that a little bit. So if you're familiar with direct-to-consumer industry or space, about a decade ago, a little more now, you start seeing brands like Bonobos and Warby Parker and Casper and Everlane. And, picking Bonobos, Andy is a friend of ours, and just kind of picking on them a little bit. It's a great brand. They essentially, were able to pick on one category, started with men's pants, right? And their thesis was that, they wanted to essentially leverage e-commerce. And this was the time where Shopify's of the world starting to actually come up to life. And it was very easy to a certain extent to create a brand. Their thesis was to essentially just pick any category, in this case, men's pants, and be able to actually create affinity with the customers through storytelling, through branding, and through customer service. And back in 2014, when we started thinking about this concept of CARAA and try to lead through products, we said, look, there's a lot of good things about native digital brands and DTC brands like Bonobos that came before us. But what we wanted to do is leverage and the learnings that we gain from looking at brands like Bonobos or Everlane or Warby Parker or Casper, but really kind of flip it around a little bit and say, can we actually lead by design versus just fancy storytelling? So, the last thing I say about the brand before I pause is that, so when we started the brand, if you look at my co-founder's background, she's a CFDA fashion designer, spent a number of years with Alexander Wang, Ralph Lauren, always in the luxury handbag space. So our concept is to essentially come up with a set of bags that is not only beautiful in terms of aesthetic, but it's also very practical and very functional. So for example, we launched the brand initially with, one product. It's still one of our best-selling products called the Studio Bag. And the idea behind the product is that it's made from the same factory as some of the world's leading luxury brands. The bag itself actually have multiple carrying modes. We were one of the first brands that actually offered multiple carrying modes, so that if you go into the gym or the office or going around, you don't need multiple bags. You can essentially use one bag that will substitute for all the different bags that you might have needed for the different things that you need throughout the day. We wanted to keep the prices way below the traditional luxury price of $1,000 plus. So even though the materials and the manufacturing is done no different than luxury handbag brand, we attempted back then, but we are still trying to keep the prices below $400. So that's kind of a little bit of background on the thesis why we started the brand. Our go-to-market model is very much direct to consumer. I call ourselves more of a native digital integrated brand, just because I think there's a lot of DTC or direct to consumer brands out there, right? You would argue that most fashion brands, even though if you do a lot of wholesale, you still do a little bit of DTC because of the retail stores that you have. I think what's different about us is that, we are what we call native digital or native digital first. So we primarily interact with our customers through digital channels, but we are integrated, meaning that we actually have, invested and have a stake in our factories that we work with. So, for us, in order to create a kind of win-to-win complete customer experience and win her affinity towards the brand, we think that the only way to do that is if you own the entire supply chain from design, manufacturing, all the way to, post-purchase. So that's kind of the initial idea behind the brand. We do work with few retail partners. So, we do work with brands like Nordstrom and Equinox and Urban Outfitters and so on and so forth. And but again, the main bulk of our revenue really comes from e-commerce. So, but yeah, that's kind of a little background behind the brand. We've fortunately able to grow really fast. I think in the last 4 years, without purposely taking any venture funding. Year over year since 2017, we grew about 350% year after year. So it's been a pretty good ride, I think, until now. So, Maren, let me pause here. I'm gonna pass it back to you and see if you have any topics that you want to cover specifically, or are there any specific questions that have come in?
Yeah, so that is super interesting, and thank you for all that information. And we can go back and dive into that as we move on. I want to kind of bring it back a little bit more, and I want to ask you, you mentioned like your family has been involved in this. What was your pathway to the undergraduate world? What was your undergraduate experience like to Case Western Reserve University for a higher degree program? And then how did those all link up in finding yourself at GE and then further on into the world?
Yeah, so I went to the undergraduate at the University of Massachusetts. So I had an engineering background. Coming from, I think, a Asian family background, I think engineering was somewhat one of the career options that I'd taken. So I loved it, truthfully speaking. I mean, what I loved about engineering from my undergrad, at least, was the problem-solving aspect of things, right? So even until right now, and I'm sure I'm going to touch on COVID-19, every day is problem solving. And, funny enough, I do actually from time to time remember all the problem solving skills I've gathered through my undergrad or through Case that I'm actually applying currently, right? So even decades after. So I love the Case program. So in terms of my EMBA experience, Case, but with the EMBA program, it allowed me to actually still have my role with GE and still going to school at the same time, which was somewhat important to me. I mean, there were some great programs out in the nation that we looked at, I looked at personally, but again, specifically chose Case mainly because of that flexibility. And I think more and more EMBA programs now allows you to actually do it part-time or while you're still keeping your role. But back then, I think Case was one of the first. And what I loved about that is the fact that I can apply all the conversations and discussions and topics that I learned back from the Case classroom directly into my, back then I had a general manager operational role that I was leading. So it was, I'm a practical person, so I love the practicality of it. I always felt that things discussed in classroom were very theoretical, and doesn't have real life applications. And I think that was one of the key things I loved about the program is how practical the topics were, and then how engaged even the professors were in terms of having real life conversations with the students. So it was a great experience, and the networking is also huge. I think I mentioned this before. I'm in touch with a good group of friends that I made back in my Case days. A lot of them are still in Cleveland. Some of them moved on, but yeah, we chat at least I think once a quarter. In terms of where they're at, and our families are friends with each other. So it's been, I found the experience extremely rewarding, and I miss it. So.
Yeah. Well, that's good to hear that you are still in contact with all of your Case friends and that they've become friends and family friends for so long, like after that experience. So getting back into what your day-to-day is like, and what and how you work internationally. How do you manage, like you mentioned, your supply chain from the start to the finish to even after the consumer has already purchased the product? How does that work at an international level? And what does your leadership look like in kind of facilitating that and ensuring producer or consumer satisfaction?
Yeah. So this is a very debated topic, I would say, right? So I think if you know, back when I think about my days when I went to business school, you look at brands like Nike. So Nike has been very vocal, for instance, as a retail brand, to be making the point that non-vertical integration actually works better from the profitability standpoint, meaning that they don't really own their manufacturers. They work with, you know, all sort of different factories around the world and source through them, and they find that to be the most cost-effective and productive way to work with their supply chain. We disagree, you know, just because I've seen how non-vertical companies work or vertically integrated companies work. And, you know, you could definitely make an argument that financially speaking, it's more effective or more cost efficient to do a non-vertical integration, because you essentially dealing with third parties and you can the switch costs between the different suppliers are somewhat lower than you only own suppliers. But, you know, the downside of that is that you need, and most importantly, you lose control of your throughput. So, you know, in terms of production, right? So when I think about retail brands in general, there's really two key things I look at in terms of, you know, our profitability, right? One is cost of goods sold, which, you know, again, it's something that I think somewhat equal across a lot of different brands if you have certain scale. And the second thing is inventory. How easily can you control your inventory? And for us, you know, because of our nimble supply chain, because we own our suppliers, or at least have a stake in it, we can actually get away with very small minimums in terms of our ordering batches and do it very quickly. So on that side, yes, you know, we might not work with a lot of different factories and hence, you know, we might not gain some efficiencies there, but I think what we gain is control over our quality of our products, but most importantly, also be able to actually utilize our cash in a very effective way, right? So that's point number one. And then, you know, one of the things that we actually pride ourselves in is the multiple iterations and feedback that we gather from our customers back into supply chain, back into design. So that much seasonality. So unlike some fashion brands where every season you might have a different collection, we try to keep most of our product evergreen. So, you know, our thought as a DTC brand or as a native digital modern luxury brand is that we want to be known for a very good set of specific products versus a bazaar of all sorts of products, right? So, and what that translated to essentially is iterative design process, you know, very similar to software if you think about it, where we, you know, work with our customers. We have focus groups that we work with. We have, you know, different surveys that we pull, and we have influencers and ambassadors that we work with on a quarterly basis, where we actually ask, hey, what do you like about the current product? What do you like the current iteration? Is there anything else we can do to improve? And then be able to control that data point and feed that back to our supply chain and to our design team. So once again, I think we are pretty convinced, you know, that in order for you to gain affinity from the customer and create that bonding and the customer relationship with our customers, you kind of have to own the entire value chain. It's just very difficult to do it if you only own maybe the front end and the back end manufacturing, you outsource to somebody else. Again, you might lose some efficiency from a financial standpoint, but I think in the long run, it's going to create a much solid business.
Yeah. On that note too, so a lot of conversations today regarding fashion are regarding sustainability and, you know, where products come from and where they go. So how does your company incorporate a sustainable model? Because it sounds like you are really focused on knowing, you know, where your products start and where they end.
Yep. Sustainability is very hard. You know, it's very difficult. And by the way, when I say sustainability, I think, you know, a lot of people equates sustainability to just product sustainability in terms of utilizing recycled materials. I think sustainability is way more than that, right? I mean, we're good friends with the team at Starbucks, and I think Starbucks, at least up until several years ago, were really, really good at sustainability, just because I think they think about sustainability holistically. For us, so we kind of break that down into several components. And again, a lot of this is learning as we go, just because I think sustainability is very difficult to do. But starting with products, we're trying to utilize as many recycled products as we can. Recycled product is a little easier when it comes to synthetic products. So, you look at our nylon that we use for our bags is half recycled right now, just because fully recycled nylon right now still is a little difficult to utilize for material sake and also from a cost standpoint. So I think as the supply chain gets better, I think we should be able to utilize, fully recycled nylon very quickly. When you think about materials like leather, I think leather is a little more difficult to get our hands on in terms of recycled leather, because think about from the chemical composition standpoint, it's hard to utilize recycled leather. But what we are doing is we're working with suppliers. Right now we just signed with a supplier out in Germany, for example, where we're working with a tannery that's carbon neutral. So even though the material itself, it's not recycled because it's leather, I think the way they're going about tanning and fabricating the leather it's carbon neutral. So there are things that we're trying to do that essentially are more sustainable without just thinking about recycled materials. Another component to me, at least from the sustainability standpoint, is profitability, right? So I think I touched on this a little bit before, but we purposely actually did not take any venture capital funding when we started this journey, just because fundamentally, I do think that for retail fashion brands, there's something to be said about not being a good fit for venture funding. I think, a lot of people might disagree with me but the truth is, I think if you look at a lot of the retail brands that's out there, the truth is, I don't think there's any studies or data points that shows any success stories of VC-backed retail brands yet, right? The few brands that I've seen that exited, and I want their names here, but it has not been what I call a home run in terms of being a sustainable model. And what that translated to, if you're a retail brand and taking VC funding, is that you are very focused on growth. So what that translates to essentially is you have, let's say, 18 to 20 more months, you get a lot of cash infusion. And within that period, your number one, number two goal is to grow, right? So your revenue has to grow really quick, but perhaps your profitability might not be one of the top KPIs that you look at. And to me, that's not really sustainable, right? Because, when something as tragic as COVID-19 hits, what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to start laying off people. And to me, that is not a sustainable business model, right? So that's why I was saying before, sustainability, there's material sustainability, but there's also business sustainability in terms of practices. So, for that reason, we purposely did not take very large VC infusions. We work with private investment offices to grow very responsibly. And, just to kind of take COVID-19 as an example, we're very proud to say that we have not furloughed or laid off anybody from our team, which is something that we take a lot of pride on, and something that we can hope that we can finally start picking up again. So again, it's probably a very, very big topic that it would take this entire hour to touch on in terms of sustainability. But I think that the answer for us is that we don't know the answers. We definitely don't have all the answers either. It's definitely a learning process, but we just keep reminding ourselves that sustainability goes beyond material usage.
That's a really good way to think about things as an entire sustainability of both the people within the business and the product you're making. So I'm going to ask another question, but also after Aaron answers this following question, I want to turn it to some audience and participant questions. So if you want to leave them in the chat or the Q&A box, we'll get to them after. So for Aaron, you mentioned working with a German tannery and that you work with factories in China, but you're based in New York. So what is it like navigating international business? How do you, like, from everything from a language barrier to financial barriers and different governments, what is that like for you, for your partners, and like how has that experience been from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, we do have a little bit of unfair advantage in this case. You know, that's, I think, part of the reason why we're able to come up to speed rather quickly. It is because, you know, we are Chinese. You know, both my co-founder and I, we grew up in Europe. So, you know, my co-founder and I, she was born in Spain. I was growing in Spain. That's how our families knew each other back from our backgrounds. So, you know, so to that extent, we do have somewhat of unfair advantage because we come from a very global, diverse background, right? You know, I think the key to anyone who's thinking about kind of, you know, starting a business with a lot of international footage, footprints, I would say, is you have to have people on the ground. You know, Zoom calls don't cut it. You know, like it's you know, it might be efficient for a lot of different things, maybe on the daily operational things that might be useful, but you know, you have to have a team on the ground that's local, that understands the local regulations, that understand the statutory regulations, that understand the local custom rules, and so for us, it's all about putting the right players. So the hiring process is very important, but you know, so it's about putting the right leadership at those local hubs. So if you look at my team, right, for example, so we're still under 50, so we're still relatively nimble of a team, but you know, 1/3 of our team is based in China, just because, you know, we are, at the end of the day, we are, you know, as much as of a DTC and somewhat of a, you know, fashion brand, I see ourselves very much as a supply chain, global supply chain organization. So a lot of our staffing is staffed or created around manufacturing processes, quality control, and most importantly, sourcing. So sourcing, merchandising, those are two key roles that we have. So I think hiring the right team and leadership in those local hubs, I think it's very important. And then, you know, just keeping a very close communication with them. You know, I try to make it out in Asia at least 4 times a year. We make it to Europe at least 3 times a year, just so that we can spend time with the people on the ground, building this relationship. But once again, you know, I think, you know, for anyone that thinks that you can actually do everything from New York, you know, or whatever your HQ is, without putting your team, you know, where the action really happens, I think you probably want to reconsider that. So, and again, you know, I think the similar approach with, you know, my time back in my GE days, right, is that, you know, you have your HQ, but even if you look at our HQ team is very small. Most of the staffing and the investment in people, we make it at the location where the action happens. So it's never easy, you know, just because global processes are very complex, and we're seeing that more than ever with COVID-19, just because I think, you know, regulations change all the time, custom rules change constantly, administrations change, in our current administration also is changing rules on us all the time. So it's about being nimble and be able to adapt and pivot.
Yeah. So I think Carrie had a question. Do you want to go ahead?
First of all, hi, Aaron. How are you?
Hey, Carrie, what's going on?
Thank you. Not much. Aaron is a friend of my husband, so we know each other well.
And yourself.
and me. That's right. So my question relates to sort of, you know, shepherding a company through a time of crisis. Obviously, this is an extremely unusual and unprecedented time. How are you approaching that, and how have you sort of changed your sort of strategy from week to week as this thing has unfolded?
Yeah. Hey guys.
Hi.
I know Remy. Yeah, you know, week to week is right, Carrie. You know, I just sat with CNBC the other day, and they were asking me a very similar question. And look, we went from, you know, quarterly forecasts and yearly forecasts to, week-to-week forecasts of our, pulse meetings on a daily basis, looking at our numbers. So I think not having unrealistic expectation, truthfully, it's one of the key things that you have to do in terms of operational rhythm, just because things are changing so rapidly on a daily basis. So we scrapped our 2-year, 3-year growth playbook and essentially just went back to kind of the week-to-week or month-to-month forecast, which, truthfully speaking, that's what you do when you're running a startup. And that's what we did in the first year of our life cycle. So that's the first thing. I think for us, the main thing is protect our customers and protect our employees. That was the first thing that we kind of made a decision on. So, obviously during this time, financially speaking, you have to, cash is king, and we're protecting our balance sheet as much as we can by, loading up on cash, if you may. So renegotiating long-term contracts, renegotiating as many contracts we can, perhaps in certain cases, doubling down relationship with some suppliers and saying like, look, I'm committing myself to a longer term commitment, but give us better rates or better price. So there's things that we're doing, that we're trying to do on the defensive side in light of pandemic. But the number one checked in terms of employment. So, obviously, we have PPP. So there are programs out there that we can tap into. And fortunately for us, because we are not VC funded, we did have to tap into our reserves. So there's certain things that we're doing to making sure that, we're protecting our employees throughout the pandemic. I think the last thing I would say during this crisis is this is our opportunity to also build a relationship with our customers, right? This is the time that we want to strengthen the relationship with our tribe. So what that translated to is, you guys probably have seen our website, if you visit our website, that we, in light of shortage in terms of PPE, we quickly pivoted our own factories and our network of factories to start making masks. And the way we're going about that is for every mask we sell, we donate it to either the WHO organization or, right now I think we have about 32 organizations that we're working with in terms of donations. And the hope is, obviously we want to contribute to the fight. I don't want to just wait it out. I think a lot of people are taking the approach of, well, let's just sit this one out and see what happens. I kind of said this to my team. Hopefully this is the only pandemic I get through in my lifetime, and I don't want to sit in the sidelines, right? I want to contribute to the fight. So, and what that translates to once again is, building relationship with our existing customers, building relationship with new customers that we might acquire throughout this particular programs that we're launching, and tell the brand story, right? It's to create that affinity. Back to my point about kind of creating affinity with our customers. I think, these are some of the measures that we're taking in order to create and strengthen the bonding with our customers.
Thanks, Aaron.
Yeah.
This is Leslie. I actually had a quick question going back to you discussing your revenue streams. So I know you said direct to consumer, but you also partner sometimes with majors like Nordstrom's. And based on my personal experience in the industry, I know that oftentimes these larger organizations will book $100,000 order with you, and then a week before it ships, they cancel. So how does one safeguard themselves?
Yeah, I think the short answer is hard because, even though you have a purchase order, you have a contract in place, to your point, when crisis like this happens, they can definitely cancel on you. Our exposure with large retailers are very small. And truthfully speaking, part of the reason why we set up our organization is to protect against situations like this, right? And even under normal circumstances, even if it's not just during crisis, wholesale, it's never easy, and it's becoming harder and harder as a lot of these majors are struggling to actually make sales. So, you have right of return, so they can return the products back to you. They can take a discount if things actually don't sell and ask you to pick up the actual discounted amount, and they can cancel the last minute. So all those are real, risks that, we factor in place. And again, once, we don't work with that many major retailers for that reason alone. I think the ones that we do work with, I think we've built pretty good rapport over the years. Sure, you can legal up and go after them, or utilize factors or collection indices to do that. But, we just felt that the best way to actually maneuver through this kind of risk is a relationship building. And then another thing that we always trying to do over the time is not to overexpose yourself, right? If your entire business and let's say a majority of your revenue streams counting on those majors, you are at risk. And so instead we said we control the supply to them. When we work with a lot of them, a lot of times, we are very selective in terms of the models and the SKUs and the different collections that we provide to them. And then, again, there's going to be inherent risk anyways. You just try to maneuver and protect yourself as much as you can.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, look, we have a friend of ours that leads a factoring company. For those of you who know what factor is or don't know what factoring is, essentially you sell your receivables to them and they will, on your behalf or on their own behalf, actually go collect the money to the retailers you work with. And I just chatted with them and, they're struggling. It's hard. I mean, you negotiate as much as you can, you trying to say, don't cancel it, we'll give you a discount instead, because, for retail brands or for brands in general who are, counting on those majors to actually make their revenue, if they cancel the order on you a week before, that's detrimental to your business, right? I mean, not only you already put up the cash to actually make the products, but now you have, potentially a gazillion number of units sitting with you that you might not be able to actually sell it. So it's very risky. And like I said, that's why I think, brands and retail brands that over leverage themselves, I think, we will see what this pandemic is going to do to them through this crisis. But again, I think the key is, the more you can control your own destiny, the better. And again, for us is, minimizing that exposure with major retailers.
Yeah. We have another question from Maria. She asks, in terms of changing consumer tastes towards a trend of buying less and being more pragmatic, how will your brand adapt to those changes in the new consumerism in which people are trying to, especially now, be a bit more mindful with their money and spend wisely? Yeah,
that's a great question. We promote circular economy as much as we can. Matter of fact, I think in the next 6 to 8 months, you probably will see what our interpretation of circular economy looks like. I think, that's honestly the main value proposition behind our brand, right? Is that instead of selling you a product that it might go out of style in a few months or a year or so, or something that might break, we say, look, to a certain extent, this is the only bag that you probably will need on a daily basis. And the reason we can claim that is because we build a lot of features and functionalities in there so that if you are taken to the gym, you can use it. If you're taken to a date, you can use it. If you're taken to the office, you can use it. So the idea is to somewhat declutter your life by, not utilizing, as many bags as you would need if you didn't have our product. And the idea, again, is to be able to utilize our product for a lot of different things that you go through your life. We don't advertise this, but we do have a lifetime warranty in terms of, the not the wear and tear, but the actual product itself. So we stand out behind our products and we tell that to our customers, when we have the chance on a one-on-one basis. So again, I totally think that the consumer trend is marching towards that, the circular economy that I mentioned before, that less is more and people want to declutter their life. Hence, that's another reason why we don't have seasonal colors or seasonal products either. So we don't need to give you, a new bag or a new product every single quarter, right? Or every single season, because what we always say is that if we're not disrupting an existing style when we introduce a new product, then we shouldn't be launching that product, right? So, I talked about our studio bag before. There's also, a studio tote as another good example that we have, which is a tote that actually can be worn as a backpack or be worn as a tote. And you can change different modes, depending on how you want to use it. So, when we first started that particular style, when we first launched the style, there were many totes in the market that actually allows you to transform from one mode to another. So once again, the idea is to give something to the end consumer that hopefully it's one of the few things that she keeps in her closet, and not add more clutter through her day. So it's a great question, and I'm a strong believer that I think more and more people want less stuff. So I think more you can give them something that they can hold on to, and it's versatile enough that they can use for different things. I think that's the key to win.
Great, thank you. I think Ekta has a question. She's going to ask too. We're going to ask if Ekta. Okay, well, there you go. Oh, muted again.
Maybe just go ahead and Maren ask it for us. She put it in the chat, just ask it for her.
Yeah, so the question was whether or not you have any plans on launching any new products, if work right now is still kind of designing and possibly thinking about the future, and what you expect the economy to look like when it does bounce back, and how your group plans to reemerge into that and set yourself apart from everyone else that will try to be buying for everyone's dollars, especially.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. So I don't know when the economy is coming back. It's a very tough question, and we're still hoping and planning that third quarter and fourth quarter is going to be it. Again, I think the new world, once we emerge into the new world, it's going to be very different. But if you read the news coming from Asia, China specifically, a lot of the cities in China have eased up their lockdown controls and measures, and there's this trend happening among consumers called revenge shopping. I don't know if you guys heard of that term, but so essentially translates to basically people cooped up in their homes and not be able to shop for a while, and then once, of course, everybody started consuming again, they started to buy a lot of different products, and surprisingly, not surprisingly, but interestingly, handbag actually is one of the top categories that people will start spending money on once they start spending again. So we're banking on that. That's going to happen in the U.S. and through our customer base. So I think, a couple of things. One, launching a new product during pandemic, I think it's risky, right? Because, first of all, we are in the category where that's currently being impacted quite a bit. So if you look at the top categories within e-commerce that's being impacted through the pandemic, handbag, luggage. Oh, I got kicked off for a second. Did I lose you guys?
Yeah, you did, but you're back.
Okay. So what I was saying is that I think, if you look at the current trend, the top categories that are being impacted through the pandemic, one of them is handbag and accessories and luggage, which makes sense, right? I mean, people are staying in, they're not traveling, they're not going to the gym. So there's less need for it. But once again, we are banking on the fact that once the economy picks up again, I think this will be one of the categories that our customer base will consume again. I think right now, the key thing we can really focus on, back to my point before, is about building goodwill and affinity with our customer base. Is that, we want to utilize this opportunity to tell people who we are, that our attempt to do good, in this fight against this global pandemic. And we already start seeing a lot of great positive feedback from our customer base, thanking us and kind of saying that, listen, honestly, I don't need a bag right now, but when I have money to purchase again, or when I'm purchasing again, I'm buying you, because of XYZ reason. So I think that's what you can do, as a brand currently, is to, stay relevant, contribute to the fight given the current situation, and stay relevant. we do have a number of very exciting styles that's coming up, but we didn't make a decision to hold back on a few of them, just because I think launching a product during this time where the demand is very low, it's not the best way to utilize a new product to tell your brand story. So we're gonna wait for that right time to launch that.
Yeah, I definitely understand that. So as we kind of segue towards the end, I'm a sucker for some like feel-good stories, and I'm also really big about failure. So if you have like a story of like sometime that you tried something and you ended up failing, but then maybe another story of how that kind of led to a later on success.
Boy, a lot of failures, which is good. Fail. I always say, fail big, fail quick, fail cheap, and because I think that's where you learn. I think, the first one comes to mind is hiring. And this probably, it's not a surprise to a lot of leaders on the call, anybody who have hired before, that hiring the wrong people, a lot of times actually can be very detrimental. That's probably my most expensive lesson, in terms of, we all have this tendency to go after the shiny object, in terms of, this person comes from great pedigree, and there's certain things that you look at when you hire. But I think, when I look at some of the wrong decisions we made in terms of hiring, that led to a lot of problems down the road. So I think, go through due diligence and trust your gut when you hire. It's probably a very important lesson for me, at least. I think, and this comes from my Lean Six Sigma days back with GE, is test little things and be able to leverage that in terms of scale, or in terms of utilizing little things to actually give you data points that you need to do bigger things. So what I mean with that is, just like very much, I'll give you a perfect example. So, my co-founder, she is a fashion designer, right? And fashion designers are essentially artists. They're tastemakers. They're very emotional in the sense that they're the one who actually will tell you things that you need before you even know you need them, right? I mean, there are very few good ones out there, and I believe my co-founder is probably one of the best in the market, or in the segment that we're in. But the downside, not the downside, but what's interesting about, I think, working with artists is that they're not ready to go to market with something that they don't think is ready. Which is interesting, because they want to essentially perfect a product before it actually gets launched. And so do I. But coming from a business background and coming from perhaps an operations background, I come from the school of, if it's 70% there, let's go and let's learn, right? So I think to have that balance between the two of us, I think it's critical, I think, to ensure success of your business, is that, you can't really wait until you're 100% there, because you might miss the market. Your competitor might already caught to the trend that you're on, or whatever idea you had, and already beat you to the market. And first to market definitely has its own values. But, obviously you shouldn't go to market when you have a 30% or 40% product, because then, your product is probably going to get a majority of it returned. So I think the biggest lesson learned for us is to have that balance between, 100% ready and then a 70 or 80% ready, and then see where's that launching point. In terms of feeling good story, oh boy, there's a lot of them. Right now, for us, during the pandemic, we launched CARAA Cares, like I mentioned before, which is, for every mask we sell, we donate. And so it's a huge cost for us. For a small brand, it's a huge charitable program, if you may. So, I remember, I just kind of, since we're in a small group, I don't know how many people are on the call, but I just share this as a small story. So I went to my 3PL, my warehouse management company, and I said, listen, and by the way, these guys, and I won't say what they are, but they're very cutthroat as far as negotiating rates and prices and so on and so forth. And, you know, always want squeeze you a little more, right? So I went back to them. I said, listen, we're launching this new program. It's a huge cost for us. I'm trying to minimize costs as much as I can because, you know, we're taking on a pretty big investment. You know, can you help us? And without even spending a second in terms of negotiating, they came back with, you know, a very, very, very low rate and said, you know what, we want to come in with you guys in terms of fighting, you know, in this global pandemic. Here's what we're going to do for you guys. And I almost choked up when I hear that. I'm like, wow. And I thought you were this, you know, cutthroat, you know, always negotiating, always, you know, kind of maximize profit kind of CEO. And so that's, you know, the first thing I can think of right now in terms of how people are stepping up to the plate and just becoming more human. You know, I think that's the key thing right now for us. It's be more human, less business, you know, and so we can get through this.
Yeah, more human, less business.
Yeah.
That's really beautiful. Thank you so much, Aaron. I'm going to toss it back to Michael, who's going to help wrap up and maybe touch on any other like last few things. But thank you so much for all of your answers. I think very, very interesting story and very, very awesome what you're doing now.
No, thank you. Thank you for the great questions and the moderation.
Great. Well, thank you, Maren, for moderating, and again, congrats on about to be graduating and for all that you've done during your time on campus. You've really made a huge impact during your time, and we're sorry to see you go, but soon you'll be an alum giving talks in our speaker series, so that'll be great. Aaron, thank you so much for doing this. We've heard so many wonderful things about you from classmates. I'm so glad Carrie was able to join. I know that you and Brent and Ali Ahmed, who was a speaker before, were all classmates, and it sounds like a wonderful group. I'm glad that network continues to be useful and important as friends and folks in your business network.
Very close friends, and actually just an anecdote just to show how close we are. Brent is probably one of the few people that actually met my grandma when Case took us to China. So we had a year-end, you know, graduation trip, and ours was Japan and China. And Brent and I snuck out, you know, in from the main group, and actually I said, let's go visit my grandmother, have some home cooked meal, and Brent came with me. So very close friends that you know, hopefully it's a lifelong friend.
That's awesome. Now you're entrepreneurs slugging it out in the crisis, sharing stories. Who would have known 12 years later where you'd be and what you'd be doing?